Hello, thanks all for joining to the fourth episode of the Vitalis Reach webinar series. Today we're going to uncover the key characteristics of industrial XR. So we have an exciting session ahead with key contributions from Jacobs Engineering, one of our customers, and I'll introduce Ben in a few minutes. But we're also going to share an interesting perspective on how changes in the consumer VR landscape may be changing the perception of you and me working in the industrial domain. And John will take us on a journey and also present us why it's important to recognize this trend. But before we start, welcome again. Thanks all for joining from so many different parts of the world, customers, experts, and we are very happy to have you here. I'm also happy to have you here, John, to you as well. So, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Dimitri. Looking forward to today.
Excellent. So let me do a quick introduction for those of you, for those viewers who are new. John started his career as an engineer in the aero and fluid dynamics, and about 10 years ago moved into software product management. As of 2019, he's managing the Vitalis software product lines, and in that position, he's driving the vision, but also executing the roadmap for the Vitalis Reach product and other software products lines. So again, John, good to have you here. I think it was September that we run our last Reach webinar, so it's good to be back on the ground.
Yeah, thank you.
Quick update on myself. I'm supporting Vitalis customers in building, let's say, better collaboration and connecting experts from our customers around the world. We started a leadership network in December last year where we connect, meet, share, and learn from each other. And I will share a bit more links and info later in the information for those of you who are interested. So the Reach webinar series, we typically talk about what's keeping the industry awake at night, key challenges, trends, talk about XR and also our Vitalis Reach products on how that can support and is supporting the industrial enterprise. But today's focus, among many of the topics that we typically cover, is about a case study from Jacobs, and Ben will step in the footsteps of Toro and Ford. And as we discuss the emerging trend on professional XR against consumer XR. So a few words on the Jacobs introduction. So they moved from Word documents and PowerPoints to more visualizations, and Ben will take us along into the journey and also how it is helping them reaching next levels and creating tangible value for the organization. On the householding, so we have about, what is it, 50 minutes and a little bit more. Depends also on the Q&A. For all of you during the sessions, please ask questions in the panel, share as many as possible. We will collect them, move them to the Q&A. And if we cannot address them in the Q&A, we will definitely get back to you, try to answer them at least, and get back to you over mail. So on Reach, just one word on Vitalis. So Vitalis is an end-to-end solution provider in the VR XR domain. On one hand, providing software, market-leading software solution to render, create, and distribute visualizations. On the other hand, we also bring in decades of experience in designing and developing VR walls, caves, which we also call systems. So we combine, I think, a unique set of expertise to benefit our customers. But today's focus is definitely on the software part, and we typically talk about Vitalis Reach. And for those of you interested, learning more about that product and how it democratizes visualizations and brings it in the hands of the learners in the organizations. Visit our website, visit the other webinars, and you'll find a lot of information about what this product uh, means to our customers. So we go to move forward to, and I'm very pleased and excited to announce this session from Jacobs, from Ben. So let me quickly introduce Ben. He brings in 10 years of experience in the nuclear industry, been involved there, I mean, from concept to detail design and manufacturing. And over the years, his engineering focus changed from mechanical engineering to digital engineering, also incorporating the latest technologies to deliver the projects. Ben is also familiar with 3D laser scanning and knows how to create value out of point clouds. As you could also, as you will experience, there's a deep expertise on VR and also possessing the knowledge and the skills to convert engineering models into fully interactive virtual models. Ben was supposed to be live with us here today, but his presence was required at the Sellafield nuclear site in the UK. And for that reason, we recorded his session in a kind of interview on Friday, which we'll stream in just a moment. So he will also not be able to join the Q&A. However, he told me he's very keen to get your inputs and ideas, and so please also share the questions to Ben, and he's more than keen to answer over mail back to you. So let's go to Ben's story.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, and thank you for inviting me to speak. So yeah, my name's Ben Gaffner. I work for Jacobs, and I'm a senior mechanical designer. And I was brought on to help lead the team implementing the visualization tools on engineering projects. So Jacobs is in the UK is a nuclear decommissioning company, and we work with companies like Sellafield and Dounreay on their legacy facilities in dealing with their historical waste and implementing new processes. So a lot of the things that we have to interact with in terms of starting new projects is we have a lot of legacy buildings, old buildings that don't have, all this fancy 3D model data that comes along with them. A lot of them just have a significant amount of them, unfortunately, just have 2D drawings that were hand drawn in some cases, that have been photocopied several times, and then integrating that with new build, whether that be with inside existing buildings or an addition as lean-tos to support processes for importing, exporting, or managing nuclear material. We do this from the concept phase or the preliminary phase all the way through to commissioning, operations, decommissioning. So it's the full life cycle of the projects that we offer as a company across all disciplines. So a little bit about visualization and what it is for Jacobs is the way we see it is trying to get everything that we've been doing historically and bringing it to as many people as possible in the most comprehensive way possible. So, like I said, we take projects from the feasibility stage, the prelim design stage, all the way through to decommissioning. And that's something that we have to take in, decommission is something we have to take into account when we're designing our facilities, that we can show and demonstrate that they've been designed to be dismantled safely in a safe and environmentally safe manner. And for the visualization aspect, we see this as introducing animations of processes, of finite detailed movements, interactive engineering models for design reviews and human factors reviews. This coupling with digital twinning for construction and maintenance that slowly gets built over time with functionality added as the project progresses. And then in the end, training and operations tools, whether that be virtual reality or just interactive animations, like I mentioned earlier. These are all things that we're looking into implementing into the package that we offer as a company. Previously, like I've said, we deal with a lot of historical drawings that are very dated, have been photocopied multiple times. if we want to get information across, we'll put PowerPoint presentations together. Maybe we'll have 3D models that people have produced or vendors may supply, and we'll have still images of those. And what's most likely is just wordy documentation of processes, like mechanical flow diagrams, sequence diagrams, business execution plans, everything like that, everything that people will be familiar with. What often happens with documents like those is there's a lot left up to interpretation. Retention isn't very good, and it can be a slog sometimes to get the nitty-gritty detail of how a process works and get somebody up to speed. And that time is money because it takes that person a long time to get up to speed. And often what happens is the image built up in one person's mind might be completely different to an image built up in another person's mind. And that may only be realized later down the line once design has begun and we've started to create 3D models for people to actually see. So currently what we do is we use, from a visualization perspective, we use Unreal Engine at a very early stage in the project, and we use that to basically, where we wouldn't typically have 3D models because the engineering may not have started. This may be just a feasibility study, a study into, what needs to be done, what are the access routes, what equipment needs to be moved, what waste needs to be handled. Not something where stereotypically engineering would be involved in the design aspect. We've involved a visual media team using Unreal Engine to create those 3D environments and bring them into life for people to actually witness. I'll just play a little animation, a little video now. I'll just have that playing in the background while I kind of talk further about what it is that we've been doing. So this example, for instance, is very early doors. We had no 3D models. We had models from vendors um, that you can see, and they were implemented into Unreal Engine, and it allowed us to make a visualization before there was any actual engineering work done. Now within that, we can use 3D point cloud data. We can use engineering models as the project progresses. So we can use it we kind of like build this up as we go. And recently we've been using LiDAR and photogrammetry, and we've not used it in Anger yet, but what we're looking to use it for is a kind of an iterative process during a commissioning phase where we can very quickly get a view of where the build is up to and then feed that back into our live models. On top of using this for the visualization, we've also been using Reach from a more engineering standpoint. So Vitalis Reach is like an end tool where we create our 3D models in our chosen packages, whether it be Inventor, Revit, CAD, AutoCAD, Aviva, SolidWorks, etc. And then we can put them into Vitalis Reach, and that allows us to access those models through a web browser interface. Historically, we've done, and we still do, design review meetings using a tool called Navisworks for visualization and collecting multidiscipline models into one space, which is fantastic. But what Reach allows us to do is go one step further, and it allows each user to have their own instance. So rather than having one model up on a screen that is shared and then one person moving around and showing everybody what's going on, it's almost a collaborative space where people can enter into the model themselves, move around freely themselves. We can grab their attention when we want to, highlight things where we would like them to look, um, and use that as a more interactive way of reviewing the design. And with the comment tool that it allows you to use, we can leave comments, so we can capture everything that was said within inside the meeting alongside meeting minutes that we would do historically, just to add more depth and knowledge uh, to to take away from the meeting. Um, Once the meeting has finished, that same instance of that model can then be shared with everybody, including people who couldn't make the meeting. And what it allows them to do is they can go in at a later date and make those corrections or make those comments or add their input with full scope of what was said in the meeting, what was referred to. It allows us to see from the perspective of the person making the comment. So it just allows somebody who was not able to attend the meeting a closer insight to what was said and why it was said during the meeting, something that we've not really been able to have before, other than recording an entire meeting and letting somebody sit and review that. And then obviously we can monitor through that what version of the model was used at what meeting, and that just gives us records for us to keep track of and reference if we wanted to. I'll skip ahead in the video short. So one of the things that we've been looking at is obviously 4D and 5D modeling, and this is arcing back to the digital twin that I was talking about earlier that we're trying to implement now, start at an early stage and put as much information in as we can from the beginning and just keep building that on top of it, because trying to shoehorn this information in at a later date is very difficult and costly, time consuming, and people don't often always see the value of it. But if we can build it in early, then that's what we plan on doing. So going forward, what we really want to do is offer digital as a service, which basically means right now what we've got is we have engineers on projects who often do the BIM coordination, who often produce these visualizations, produce the animations. And as the demand for these visualizations and interactions is increasing, so is the software becoming more specialized. And what we really want to do is we want to leave our engineers as engineers, and we want to create a digital team that can then support each project individually. And the additional benefit of doing that is it allows us to pool all of our knowledge and learning from experience from current projects that we're working on, projects we've worked on in the past, and apply that to projects going forward. So we have this iterative process where we're always learning and implementing new means and ways of working. And because it's not just engineers who are doing this job for us, we can keep on top of the latest and greatest technologies and implement it in the next project that comes along. And we're not training up an engineer who is then sat on one project for 2, 3, 4 years. As some of our projects take that long, sometimes we can lose that knowledge within a project when it could be maybe used better elsewhere. And as I've said, we currently use Unreal Engine quite heavily in compared to Visionary Render. And that's purely just us based on us not having the training yet. And our idea is, because we use Visionary Render as a stepping stone to get to Vitalis Reach, we will use Visionary Render to put out these animations to introduce our digital twin from the initial stage. So from the get-go, all of our data will be going into Visionary Render that will just be updated as we go, and we'll introduce things like process flows. We can see bottlenecks. We can look at adding maintenance schemes, construction sequences, all within the same model that grows with time. That's the plan, and then continue then to push that one step further into Reach to allow us to continue to support our design reviews, our people working on site, and just making it far more accessible. So currently our Reach server is local. We have a local server set up that Vitalis help us integrate into our systems, and anybody on the Jacobs network now can access our Reach server. And I'm currently in the process of getting that server access external. So if we are on site and we speak to clients, we can just quickly send them an invite and show them exactly what we mean, while still maintaining the actual physical server on our side. And as I've mentioned, and I've said throughout this, that Reach gives us the ability to reach as many people as possible. And the main benefit from this that I've seen so far is the earlier we can get eyes on to what we are picturing and what the end goal of the design is, what the process is going to look like, the sooner we can get decisions made, the sooner we can catch little things out, little incidents out, things that would historically have only really come to fruition at a later stage of the project, when we are actually designing these and we are actually modeling these and we're having these multidisciplinary design reviews. And at that stage, a lot of time and effort has gone into design, and it's very expensive to roll back that clock. So rather than having a constant circle of an iteration, we've almost got like a spiraling wave approach where we'll do a little bit of design and then review it, and then a little bit and then review it. Instances of where we've already seen this come into play. One of the examples that you saw at the beginning of the video, we had these grit blasters, which are a COTS item. We buy them in, and the vendor had the models, had them all modeled up. So we had a very detailed model to be able to put very early doors into a facility that the visual media team modeled up. So it wasn't based on engineering data, but the vendor's items could be put in. And when we modeled the throughput process that they were planning to remove and install new equipment, we saw very quickly that there was not space for these blasters to go in. And if we did put them in, access to some of the pipework behind would have been very, very hindered and inaccessible in certain places, which again, like I said, would not have been spotted that early on in the project. That was done before any drawings had been produced. It was just mechanical flow diagrams. It was just text in boxes. It was just documents at that stage. So that allowed us to implement an important change that would have definitely cost time and money further down the line. And I'm not saying it wouldn't have been caught, it definitely would have been caught, but it's the stage in which we catch those and then the implications of redesign at that stage. And it allows us to just work collaboratively. So, you know, we have 2D drawings as a very base. That's where we started, and then we had these 3D models. And depending on the model, you might need a more powerful computer. We have Navisworks that makes our engineering models very light. Reach just takes it that one step further, and it just removes barriers to entry. So you don't need, you don't even need a computer. You can do this through a phone or a tablet or a VR headset. It allows it to just be more accessible, and there's less reason for people not to be able to view our models on a regular basis. And it's all coming from the engineering data, so we're maintaining that single source of truth. And it just allows everybody to see it, and when everybody can see it, there's far more chance in catching mistakes early doors from disciplines like, say, human factors involvement from a very, very early stage. They could just be passing and see something and make a comment, and we could implement changes based on that. Again, something that wouldn't have been caught further down the line. So that's our kind of my quick rundown of what we have done, what we're currently doing, and what we plan on doing. If any of you have any questions, I'll leave my email address up on screen for anybody to send me a message and contact me. Yeah, feel free to send me any messages and or contact Vitalis, and they can pass messages on. But thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for sharing those insights with us. I hope you will join us live in one of our next webinars. And John.
Hi.
So back again. So what do you think? It must be very interesting to you what we just heard from Ben Gaffner.
Yeah, an excellent presentation. What I'm going to try and do is think about some of the tangible actions that Jacobs have taken, and maybe link back to that as I'm going through my own slides here.
Excellent. So, John, take us along, please, and any difference of consumer XR versus professional XR?
Yeah, thank you. So what I want to do today is explore this idea that there's a clear distinction between the requirements of consumer and professional XR. And incidentally, after this slide, I'll only talk really in terms of VR, virtual reality. But anything I discuss this afternoon, it's really just as applicable to augmented or mixed reality. And the basic premise is that consumer XR is in some ways the new kid on the block. But despite that, it's really come to dominate the conversation for a number of pretty valid and understandable reasons. However, this skew brings with it a risk that we begin to think of professional XR deployments as having the same characteristics and priorities. And as we'll see, that's just simply not the case. A consequence of this is that proper planning and design of an XR deployment can be compromised or foreshortened, and options and important factors going unconsidered. Ultimately, the potential for XR in your organization can go unrealized as a result. So with that in mind then, to explore this further, we'll take a look at where we are today and where I get this notion from that things may have got a bit skewed recently. I'll talk about the risks that this poses, and I've alluded to some of the headline items already, but we'll get into that in more detail. And importantly, we'll also discuss some means by which you can help guard against this. So I'm not going to dive into a history of VR section. I'm going to assume that most of you are pretty familiar with the general broad strokes and milestones already. And if you're not, there is plenty out there, which is just a Google search away. But what becomes apparent were you to do that, or if you've already done that, is that the popular perspective on VR might be, it's taken a bit of a change of direction in the last few years. Now, I'm relatively new to the domain, as Dimitri said. I've backgrounds in engineering, but in terms of XR, it's only really been in the last 3 years I've worked specifically in this space. And when I look at any published or online histories of virtual reality, the summary I would give to it would be there's a period where where the development of VR systems is really all about professional applications, from flight simulation through to medical applications. But in any event, it's really very focused on professional use cases. And depending on where you begin your measurement from, in the modern times, we're really talking about the last 20 years or so. But over the last 5 years, the consumer landscape has grown dramatically and has assumed primacy in the popular imagination when it comes to VR. And there are many reasons for this, and I'll explore what I think are the main ones. But the reason it's important background for us is that we need to be really conscious that what's most important for a gaming or social application may not be the same when the intent is to supply information to field service engineers, to support a design review, or to deliver work instructions to assembly line operators. And this is a point to emphasize as well. There is no one overarching characterization for industrial or professional use. Each organization, use case, and deployment will be unique. And the images on this slide, and there are others I wasn't able to include, but they all begin to give some illustration of what visualization has meant in practice for a number of different organizations. And as you can see, with the greatest of respect, some of them appear a bit dated now, but that's also kind of the point. It underlines that professional VR as being something of an unseen hero for a longer time than a lot of people might be aware of. And in addition, the diversity on show with regard to how that digital content is being consumed illustrates that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So on this screen here, we have a 7-sided wall, we have someone in an early head-mounted display, and then we have this more basic projection, but also with stereoscopic capabilities in a cabin. But there are some common characteristics that help us define a successful deployment, and I'll come back to that later. But to set the scene first, we'll assess why it is that there's been such a change in focus between consumer and industrial use. So the main thing is that the price point for consumer head-mounted display devices has dropped consistently over the last 5 years. Now, if the gradient on this graph doesn't seem that steep, it's steep enough that it's become much more accessible to people in recent years to pick one up. In addition, the gaming industry itself has developed over the past maybe 10 years, arguably a little longer, into be a really huge industry. It's no longer the domain of teenagers or people who are really into this for a period of time. We've now got, it's now on a real Hollywood scale, and that then affects the amount of content that's available for these HMDs, which are coming down in price, more content available. And in addition, the final point really is that the form factor for these devices, how comfortable they are to wear, has improved dramatically since some of the earlier deployments. And it's now much more feasible to spend extended periods inside a head-mounted display and have a good experience. And as a consequence, I would say, the conversation around VR has been disproportionately skewed by this sector over the past few years. And what I want to do in this session is to take a step back and reassess the requirements from a professional user's point of view. And even this is going to be a very broad brushstroke, because I'm going to illustrate in a moment that there's even a lot of diversity when we just limit it to professional use, but it's still possible to eke out some common and key questions. So VR is something of a specialist field. There are a lot of moving parts to get right and to synchronize. And as a consumer, you can be insulated from much of the detail due to the tightly scripted and really constrained nature of consumer VR. That said, it's still possible for it to be a pretty unpleasant experience for the end user for a number of reasons. Perhaps the system requirements you've got to operate with aren't all that. If you're streaming, then bandwidth requirements can really hit. And when these things go wrong, it can lead to jitter in the screen. It can be an unpleasant experience that ultimately makes you feel sick. Motion sickness is a real issue with immersive visualizations. And consumers are somewhat resilient to this. The people who are buying this, they're a self-selecting group. They've paid their money for some of this, and so they're likely to be willing to push through some initial issues, knowing that there's some good stuff out there and that this will ultimately be a rewarding experience. But in the industrial sphere, or professional sphere, there's a much more pressing requirement to ensure that the deployment is well designed and optimized for the intended audience, who may not be as keen on VR as individuals, at least initially. Now, what this doesn't mean is trying to tick the exact same boxes as would be the priority for a consumer user. Every organization, use case, budget, ambition, and level of VR maturity is different. And these are by no means the only parameters to consider, which is what I'm really trying to get at in this diagram on this slide. So what I'm showing here is I've selected 3 dimensions: the range of users you might want to reach for a particular use case, the speed at which data involved in those visualizations is going to evolve and change, and finally, how important it is that the resulting visualization is something akin to the real world. It's photorealistic, as opposed to maybe a more cartoonish or a more CAD-like representation of the data. And within it, I've put in some sort of high-level titles for use cases, and you can already see that they spread around this 3D space quite widely. Not only that, you should expect them to change over time. And there are no fixed targets in this. Your user base will evolve in terms of expectations. Technology will develop further, both the technology directly related to visualization and also those of the surrounding systems. So as an example, machine learning may be a technology that changes how work instructions are created, so the raw material for your visualizations, or even how the visualizations themselves are updated and curated. And in any of these scenarios, there are implied changes to the data pipeline, both where it hooks into and the flow rate. So there's lots to go at technically, but the next point I really want to emphasize is that you can get all this right. It's entirely possible to tick all the traditional boxes for a visualization or a good professional visualization and still fail to bring your audience with you. There could be manifold reasons for this, and we'll cover some of the higher level ideas in the following slides. However, the background, prejudices, and even the working environment of your intended audience shouldn't be overlooked. As the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And give this some serious consideration. Understand your intended users and every aspect of the environment they work in. Pay attention to how they're used to being presented with data now and what that might mean in terms of a staged rollout. It's not always the case that technology should be deployed just because it's available. So take a holistic view. One thing I've seen before, which I think is really important if you are going to be, for example, deploying head-mounted displays for your end users, is to think about a code of conduct and how people in the real world interact with those with a HMD on. And this can really help overcome some initial reluctance to put the HMD on and create a safe environment for users. So the kind of thing I'm talking about is banning filming or taking photographs of someone while they're wearing a HMD, asking for permission before you maybe touch an elbow to help reorientate them, or just issuing verbal instructions, limiting the time people are expected to stay within the virtual world, at least initially, and making sure they have breaks in between. All of these can be important things to overcoming initial barriers. There will be more, and again, what's appropriate will depend on a lot of different factors. But it is an important step to make sure that you're teeing your audience up to come with you. But taking a step back for a moment, having talked about the diversity of VR deployments in practice when it comes to the professional environment, it's worth asking if there's a common element that runs throughout all uses of VR in a professional environment. And indeed there is. And that common thread is knowledge sharing, be it information related to new design iterations, manufacturing information or processes, knowledge on how to carry out a maintenance procedure, where a particular wiring loom connector exists behind the paneling of a particular vehicle variant. It's all information that's necessary to achieve a job or work more effectively as a team. And in some cases, many of which I've just illustrated, it can be explicit codified information which can be imparted quite directly. In others, it's going to be more implicit. It's going to be more about training behaviors, muscle memory, expectations. But in all cases, the desired end state is the same. The participants should understand something, be it a design, as I say, a behavior or a process, better as a result of consuming that visualization. And this being the case, we can already anticipate some pretty fundamental blockers to making good progress towards this goal. So the first thing would be you present someone with the visualization or the means of accessing it, and they don't feel they can access it because they've not been trained or teed up to interact with it properly. So they're fundamentally blocked from getting any further. Equally, or perhaps even more fundamentally, without a license or access to the required data, they're just stopped up front and they can go no further. And then finally, the data they need can be hidden amongst a lot of noise. Now, noise doesn't have to be a sea of other information. It can be that what they need to see is presented to them, but it's not presented to them in a way that they recognize, in a way that helps them do their job. So you think you've ticked the box, but actually what you've not considered is that fact for that consumer, they're used to it being presented differently. Different units, different means, different visual, whatever it might be. All of these things can act as barriers to consuming visualization. Equally, we can begin to pick out some key heuristics, which may not need to be ticked in every case, but they at least need to be considered of what a successful deployment of professional VR might look like. Now, I've identified this as being an effective visualization, or the result being effective visualizations. But whatever we choose to call it, the phrase is really meant to define an end-to-end capability, so from data source through to consuming the visualization, that allows it to knowledge share with the users and materially enhances their ability to do their job, work as part of a team, and achieve organizational goals. Now, again, not everything in here has to be solved in the same way. So, for example, hardware agnostic most obviously means that they can access the visualization via whatever device they have to hand. But in your instance, the decision might be that actually the best way of achieving this task is to work in the type of immersive facility we saw, the seven-sided wall or cave that we saw at the start of this presentation, in which case it's entirely legitimate to say that we thought about it and we've chosen a different route. But whatever the results, I think it's worth considering each of these five and how you're going to address them. And the context-sensitive element is something we've mentioned a few times here, both in terms of how you set up the environment for them to interact with the visualization and how information is presented to them so that it makes sense in the context of their day-to-day work. So trying to make this more specific, and it's at this point maybe I'll think back to some of the things we heard from Ben's presentation earlier. So I wrote this independently of Ben, but I could see some common ideas in the way I think Jacobs have worked and some of the things I've tried to suggest today. So first and foremost, address the problem or opportunity and not the technology. I'm extremely confident that if you suspect that VR or XR more generally has a role to play, it probably will. However, as we've seen, that doesn't mean you can just pluck the appropriate solution off the shelf. There's still a lot of thinking to do as to how to realize that ambition. Now, what we saw in the case of Jacobs was a problem space in which it's absolutely key that they think about the whole life cycle of the installations that they're working on. So the nuclear industry has to really think about these installations from cradle to grave. And some of the really tangible things that Ben picked out was the volume, so the rafts of paper, and the fact that it was paper, and the fact that sometimes it's in a suboptimal quality. So we heard about scans coming through, which the end result isn't all that it needs to be. Nevertheless, the data that's contained in there is valuable, so it needs to be translated somehow. And related to this was the cognitive load involved in interpreting this information, which at its extreme means that stuff is either missed or we fail to create a common picture. So I suspect that the 3D diagram, like when I'm referring here to the illustration I had earlier, would be different to what I presented. Perhaps photorealism wouldn't have been the third axis they would have chosen to put on there. It doesn't really matter. The point is that it's evident they've considered this and thought about how they're going to use visualization to achieve their goal. So they will have, whether they drew it out or not, some picture of what parameters are important to them. Resist the urge to assume you can just open the same packet of visualization, if I can put it that way, that many others have. Your organizational requirements are going to be different from everyone else's, even from those who operate in the same space as you. The very fact you have competition implies you're each doing things slightly different. You've got a different way of working, different unique points and capabilities, and the way you use visualization will likely reflect that. Make sure you consider how you can make your deployment fit for purpose. It may not even be a single offering in all cases. And again, we heard that Jacobs are using two different software packages in order to achieve their ends. And they'll make decisions, I assume, on what's most appropriate for a given use case. But also remember that this may not be enough to guarantee success. There are numerous examples of beautifully realized but ultimately underused VR deployment. So really fantastic facilities set up, real expertise deployed in creating visualizations, but because they haven't really thought through the end-to-end, what they're trying to achieve, it becomes shelfware in a way. So try and avoid that. And the failure doesn't have to be on the software or system side. You need to consider the audience you're addressing and how they can be brought on board. So remember, the consumer market are people who are selecting themselves. They're putting themselves forward and actually their own money forward to take advantage of VR. Your users might not tick that same box. They could be in a slightly different space when it comes to this. And finally, consider where VR is going to sit within your organization's technology stack or its capabilities. Is it going to be core? Is it going to be supplemental? Think about what this means in terms of skilling up. So if it's a core fit capability, The relationships you choose to have with your suppliers and partners is going to be very different to if it's something you've judged at whatever stage is just going to be supplemental to your day-to-day business activities. Again, it seems clear that Jacobs have a clear vision on where they're going with visualization in terms of their organizational ambitions, and that will affect how they choose to work with different suppliers and partners on the way. And you need to do something similar, even if your answer is very different. So these are the main points I wanted to get across. I hope what I've been able to do is convince you that there is no single overarching picture for visualization, even within the professional sphere, never mind the fact that the consumer market is different again, but has assumed something of a dominant position in terms of our common perception of what VR means in practice. And I hope I've encouraged you to really think about how you can make a successful visualization strategy for your industry or for your business, and given you some basic but important points to pick up on when you try and achieve that. And with that, I'll wrap up, and I'll be happy to take any questions that have come in during the course.
Johan, thanks a lot. And thanks for sharing these unique insights. I think it's a relatively new theme about consumer VR basically going mainstream and the impact it has on the professional or the industrial domain. So in my opinion, not many experts are talking about it. So it's good to talk about the implications.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, people may disagree entirely. It's my take on the way things are going. I'd be happy to hear from people who think.
Yes. So I do too. So we received some questions, and I actually also wrote down in my book an intriguing statement that you made, also about the core purpose of VR XR. I mean, your statement about that in the essence, it's about knowledge sharing, and that we are essentially solving a knowledge problem. And during your presentations, I thought about it. And I thought about the various use cases, I could come up with. And in my opinion, you're right. I mean, in the end, it's about understanding something faster or better. And even the marketing or sales use cases, I mean, they're also about communication and knowledge sharing. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, even if we think about the most extreme example I could think of, which I still think fits that definition, is one of the earlier use cases was to rehabilitate veterans with PTSD from the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And in that case, it's not obviously sharing knowledge in the same way you share knowledge about a work instruction, but it's understanding and playing out emotions and feelings. So the power that XR has is that it can speak at all those different levels, from a very procedural A then B then C, right through to something that's implicit and maybe harder to put a definition on, but you come away knowing it better.
Absolutely. So back to the agenda. So we have the Q&A starting. We received a number of questions. I think we are at 49 now. So I think let's take 11 minutes for closing. Take 2 of those questions. We will get back to you if we have not been able to answer them. So I made a selection of at least 2 of them. So, but before we get there, for those of you who want to experience Vitalis Reach, we are providing a low barrier, high impact starters package, and that contains everything you need. So for about $22K US, you can test and touch, feel the technology, and experience how it can help you in your particular use case. So complete package, that's all I need to say. 10 licenses, training, installation, what else? CAD importers, and supporting visionary render license, which Ben also talked about. So everything, complete package, and you'll be in very good hands of our customer success team. So that's for those of you who are not familiar and are interested in testing it, what it is. Back to the Q&A, and I'll keep it short. We have one question. I think that's an interesting one, John. It's about an example. So being asked you, can you give an example of a VR deployment that really shows the ideas? And I think we're talking about the dimensions here of the ideas you talked about. I mean, can you give an example?
Yeah, do you know, I know I've talked about this before, but I am genuinely a fan of it. And it was the welding cabin. And if you remember, one of my first slides showed a number of people in overalls looking at fairly dated to our eyes these days, visualization of some pipe work. Now, the reason I keep coming back to that because it does precisely do what I've been discussing today. That is, they thought about what the problem was, and in this case, it was expensive, time-consuming rework in a shipbuilding environment, and they considered how they might address that. And what they did was they took visualization to the dock hall floor in a manner which suited that audience. So they weren't expecting people to come to a completely separate, more expensive facility, perhaps something more like the seven-sided wall I also showed in that slide. And instead, what they were doing was making it accessible for people there. And if you also noticed, they were in together and pinned to the walls on the side is what's, now I can't say this for sure, but it looks to me as though more traditional A-note drawings are being tacked to the walls, so they can refer back to data sources that they've been familiar with for years while getting a better picture through the use of VR. So that for me ticks the boxes of considering the problem and the opportunity, the deployment method, and really thinking about how the audience will interact with that. So that for me is, I know I keep going on about it, but for me it's a real demonstrator of how you can get things right with VR.
And how difficult is it to look into the future? Because it's also, I mean, it's not a steady state thing. And there's another question here, I think, which is probably related. I mean, there's a question like, in the next 24 months, I mean, where do you think things will go with professional VR? Because that's also something, I mean, our audience need to take into account when thinking about investing.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is that I suspect we're in about as unpredictable phase as we'll get at the moment. There's a lot of moving parts, new entrants. There's all the talk about Meta, for example, which is pretty hard to ignore or miss. So I'm reluctant to make too firm a prediction, but I do feel pretty confident that we'll align on the idea that we need to have very focused deployments, and that's the great thing about having the range of suppliers and perspectives on this is that it will be possible to find something which does fit your organizational needs. So within the next 24 months, I think, although you could argue I would say this, I think what we're going to see is an acceptance that every deployment will be somewhat different and that how you access visualizations needs to be flexible and adapt to that. And one of the things that, again, I feel pretty comfortable in saying is that it won't be sustainable to have really tightly ecosystem bound deployments. That's not how any of us work. We have to work with different suppliers, customers. We can't take it for granted they'll have access to the same software systems that we have access to. So focused delivery, not ecosystem bound, perhaps is about as much of a prediction as I'm happy to give.
Excellent, John. So I suggest we close the Q&A. We have more questions And there's another, I mean, from one of our customers as well, so we can also provide an answer or a broader discussion in one of the upcoming forums that we have. Like to close, please bear with me. So for all customers who are interested, we have a Vitalis leadership network. So are you interested in learning from other stories? Connect with Ben Gaffner and the likes. We have 25 experts in our team, all knowledgeable, ready to share use cases, stories, challenges. So if you're interested, get in touch with me or anyone else from the team, and I'll definitely share more information about that. It's a very exciting initiative. We started it in December, and it has already proven to be a very interesting learning forum for all of us. So please sign up. At the moment, it's on LinkedIn, but we also soon profile and list the members and the activities on the website. The other one, and that's a closing slide. So thanks for having you here. Stay tuned with us. Sign up, follow us on LinkedIn, and stay tuned on the events. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming up. For customers, also the REACH working group, which is planned in April. So for those of you who are interested, I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And John, thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
For joining for this session. Thanks a lot, of course, also to Ben providing the inputs. And thanks a lot to all of you around the world being with us today. We look forward to seeing you again at one of our next events. So have a great day. Thanks a lot, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.